There are years that pass quietly, and then there are years that feel like they are trying to say something. For many people, 2025 did not feel ordinary. It felt crowded with conflict, crowded with disasters, crowded with headlines that seemed to echo words written thousands of years ago. Wars continued. Nations hardened their positions. The Middle East remained unstable. Ukraine stayed under fire. Sudan suffered famine and collapse. Myanmar was shaken by both violence and disaster. The seas rose, the skies burned, and across the world, many viewers began asking the same question. Is this just history moving through another dark cycle? Or are we watching patterns that Scripture once warned about? That question is dangerous if handled carelessly, because not every crisis is automatically prophecy. Not every earthquake is a sign. Not every war means the end has arrived. But it is also true that the Bible speaks often about war, famine, moral collapse, natural disasters, and nations trembling under pressure. So the real question is not whether fear should control us. The real question is this: how do we read these events carefully, honestly, and without exaggeration? Because 2025 gave the world many facts. It gave survivors many testimonies, and for people of faith, it also raised powerful interpretations. 3 layers: fact, testimony, interpretation. And when those 3 layers begin to overlap, the story becomes difficult to ignore. The first layer begins in the Middle East. Israel remained at the center of global attention. Conflicts involving Gaza, Lebanon, Iran, Syria, and other regional actors created a constant atmosphere of pressure. To political analysts, this was geopolitics. To diplomats, it was a regional crisis with global consequences. But to many Bible readers, it sounded uncomfortably close to the language of Zechariah. Jerusalem as a cup of trembling, a city that draws the attention of nations, a place that becomes too heavy for the world to handle. Now, we have to be careful. The fact is that Israel faced military pressure, diplomatic criticism, and massive global debate. The testimony is that many people watching from around the world felt the atmosphere changing. The interpretation is that some believers saw these events as a possible shadow of Zechariah's warning. Not proof, not a final conclusion, but a pattern that many could not ignore. And the tension only deepened when ceasefires broke, strikes resumed, humanitarian suffering increased, and world opinion turned sharper. What made the moment so disturbing was not only the battlefield, it was the feeling that the conflict was no longer contained. The war was being fought in the air, on the ground, at the United Nations, in the media, in the streets of major cities, and in the minds of millions watching from home. That is why, for many viewers, 2025 felt less like an isolated conflict and more like a warning that the pressure around Jerusalem was not decreasing. It was expanding. But the Middle East was not the only place where the atmosphere felt unstable. In Eastern Europe, the war in Ukraine continued to produce another kind of fear. Not only war, the rumor of wider war. That phrase matters, because in Matthew 24, Jesus speaks of wars and rumors of wars. And for many readers, the rumor is not a small detail. It is the atmosphere before the explosion, the threat, the warning, the sentence spoken by a leader that makes the world stop breathing for a moment. When Russian officials warned about escalation, when missile deployments were discussed, when nuclear language appeared in global headlines, many people felt that old phrase becoming strangely modern: wars. And rumors of wars. Again, the layers matter. The fact is that the Russia-Ukraine war continued with devastating consequences. The testimony is that people across Europe and the West felt the fear of escalation. The interpretation is that some Christians connected that fear to the words of Jesus. But Jesus also said something important. He said not to be alarmed, as if every war immediately means the end. That line is often forgotten. So a careful reading does not say, "This is definitely the final moment." A careful reading says, this is the kind of world Jesus told people to recognize. A world where nations rise, where kingdoms clash, where rumors shake entire populations before a single missile is launched. And that leads to another region where prophecy is often discussed, the north of Israel. In 2025, tensions involving Lebanon, Hezbollah, Iran-backed networks, Syria, and Israel created one of the most dangerous fault lines on earth. The fact is that northern Israel and southern Lebanon have long been places of military pressure. The testimony is that people living near those borders have described fear, displacement, and uncertainty. The interpretation is that some Bible teachers connect northern hostility toward Israel with Ezekiel 38. Ezekiel speaks of nations coming from the north. It mentions Persia, widely associated with ancient Iran. It describes a coalition that moves against the land. But here again, the responsible approach is not to declare every northern clash as the final fulfillment. The stronger and safer way to say it is this. For many believers, the alignment of regional pressure, Iranian influence, and attacks from the north feels like a possible preview of the kind of coalition Ezekiel describes. It means you're starting to see the pattern, and what comes next becomes even harder to ignore. For many believers, the alignment of regional pressure, Iranian influence, and attacks from the north feels like a possible preview of the kind of coalition Ezekiel describes. A preview is not the same as fulfillment, but previews matter. They show direction. They create atmosphere. They make ancient words feel less distant. And in 2025, many people felt that distance shrinking. Then came the fires. In places like Los Angeles and other disaster-hit regions, flames turned cities into images people could barely process. The fact is simple and painful. Wildfires can destroy communities, force evacuations, consume homes, and stain the sky with smoke. The testimony comes from those who saw the horizon turn red, who watched ash fall, who heard the roar of fire moving faster than expected. The interpretation comes from readers who remember Revelation's images of fire, judgment, and a wounded earth. But this is where the original claim must be handled carefully. It would be too strong to say a specific wildfire is definitely a direct act of divine judgment. That crosses from interpretation into certainty. A more honest reading says this: when people see skies darkened by smoke, cities covered in ash, and fire moving with terrifying force, it naturally reminds many Bible readers of apocalyptic imagery. Not because every flame is a prophecy, but because Scripture uses fire as one of its strongest images for warning, purification, and judgment. The danger is fear manipulation. The better path is reflection. What kind of world are we building? What do our disasters reveal about our systems, our priorities, and our vulnerability? And why do ancient images still feel so alive when modern cities burn? From fire, the story moves to one of the oldest cities on earth, Damascus. For thousands of years, Damascus has survived empires, invasions, dynasties, and wars. But Isaiah 17 contains one of the Bible's most haunting prophecies, Damascus becoming a ruinous heap. Because of that passage, every major escalation around Syria immediately draws attention from prophecy watchers. The fact is that Syria has endured years of civil war, instability, foreign strikes, internal collapse, and regional tension. The testimony is that people in and around Syria have lived through destruction on a scale many outsiders can barely imagine. The interpretation is that some believers see the continuing danger around Damascus as a possible movement toward Isaiah's warning. But the careful line is important. Damascus still exists. So it is not accurate to say Isaiah 17 has been finally fulfilled in the most literal sense. What can be said is this: the city stands in a fragile position, surrounded by forces that make the prophecy feel more immediate to many readers than it once did. That is a much more responsible statement. It preserves tension without pretending certainty. And tension is enough, because sometimes a city does not need to fall for people to feel the warning. Sometimes the warning is found in how close it appears to the edge. But the pattern does not stop with war, fire, or ancient cities. It moves into something even more human: hunger. And Sudan may be one of the most heartbreaking examples in the entire story. Because here the issue is not symbolism first, it is suffering. The fact is that Sudan has faced catastrophic conflict, displacement, hunger, and humanitarian collapse. The testimony is found in the stories of civilians struggling for food, families fleeing their homes, and children facing hunger in conditions no human being should endure. The interpretation comes from Revelation 6, where the black horse is associated with scarcity, rationing, and food becoming painfully expensive. The image is powerful, a measure of wheat for a day's wage. For many Bible readers, that does not sound abstract anymore. It sounds like a world where food becomes so expensive that survival itself becomes the daily battle. But again, caution matters. We should not use Sudan's suffering merely as a dramatic prophecy example. That would be morally wrong. The first response should be compassion. The second response should be truth. The third response may be interpretation. And when those layers are in order, the meaning becomes deeper, not cheaper. Sudan reminds the world that famine is not only a symbol in Revelation, it is a real human nightmare. And when real human beings live inside conditions that resemble biblical imagery, it should not make us arrogant. It should make us sober. Myanmar brings the story into another layer entirely. Not only suffering from disaster, but suffering caused by human cruelty. Myanmar's story carries two kinds of darkness: human violence and natural disaster. The fact is that Myanmar has faced brutal internal conflict, military violence, displacement, and documented human rights concerns. The testimony is carried by civilians, refugees, witnesses, and survivors who describe fear, loss, and the breakdown of ordinary life. The interpretation often turns to Paul's words in 2 Timothy 3, where he describes perilous times, brutality, and people losing natural affection. That phrase matters. Without natural affection, it describes a condition deeper than politics. It describes the collapse of empathy. When people can watch suffering and feel nothing, something has gone wrong at the moral center of a society. But we must not reduce an entire country to a single image of evil. Myanmar is not only violence, it is also victims, families, believers, children, people trying to survive. So the careful interpretation is this: some of the brutality reported in Myanmar resembles the kind of moral collapse Paul warned about, but the human reality is complex and should be treated with dignity. That is how a documentary voice stays strong without becoming reckless. Then, when disaster strikes a nation already wounded by conflict, the emotional weight becomes even heavier. Earthquakes, fires, smoke, collapsed buildings, people trapped between human violence and natural destruction. For some viewers, those images recall Joel's language: blood, fire, and columns of smoke. But the responsible framing is not, "This event definitely fulfills Joel." The responsible framing is, the imagery of disaster in Myanmar reminded many Bible readers of Joel's prophetic language, especially because multiple forms of devastation appeared together: blood, fire, smoke, even as interpretation. That is powerful, because the point of prophecy is not only prediction, it is awakening. It forces the viewer to ask, what happens when a society is bleeding from war, then the ground itself begins to shake? What happens when people have no safe place left to run? What happens when history, tragedy, and scripture seem to speak at the same time? From the land, the story moves to the sea. In Luke 21, Jesus speaks of nations in distress, perplexed by the roaring of the sea and the waves. That language has haunted readers for centuries. And in a world of cyclones, floods, storm surges, and coastal disasters, it feels painfully vivid. The fact is that severe storms and flooding can overwhelm even wealthy nations. The testimony is found in survivors describing waves like thunder, streets becoming rivers, homes swallowed by water, and governments struggling to respond. The interpretation is that many Christians hear in these scenes an echo of Luke 21, the sea and the waves roaring. But again, we must not say every storm is the end. A better reading is this: when modern nations are humbled by the force of water, Luke's language feels less symbolic and more immediate. That does not mean the date is known. It does not mean the conclusion is settled. But it does mean the imagery still has power. Because the sea has always represented something humans cannot fully control. Governments can build walls. Engineers can design defenses. Meteorologists can predict paths. But when the water comes with enough force, the modern world suddenly remembers its limits. And prophecy often begins there. At the edge of human control, the final geopolitical layer points east. The South China Sea, Taiwan, the Philippines, Japan, China, the United States. Strategic routes, military exercises, naval pressure. To defense analysts, this is about deterrence, sea lanes, sovereignty, and regional power. To some Bible readers, it raises questions about Revelation's kings from the east. But this is one of the areas where interpretation must be handled most carefully. The fact is that the Indo-Pacific has become one of the world's most important military flashpoints. The testimony is that people in the region live with increasing anxiety over possible conflict. The interpretation is that some prophecy teachers view rising Eastern power blocks as potentially connected to Revelation's final war imagery, but saying China is definitely the king from the East would be too strong. A careful version says, some interpreters believe modern Eastern military powers could fit the broad pattern of Revelation's imagery, especially as Asia's strategic importance continues to rise. That keeps the tension, but it avoids false certainty. And false certainty is one of the biggest dangers in prophecy content, because the goal is not to scare the viewer into panic. The goal is to keep the viewer awake, awake to history, awake to suffering, awake to scripture, awake to the possibility that human power is not as stable as it appears. And that brings us to the biggest claim of all, the timeline. Some believers look at biblical patterns and suggest that human history may follow a symbolic structure. 6 days of labor, a 7th day of rest, 1,000 years like a day, a coming kingdom after a long age of struggle. This interpretation has existed in different forms across Christian thought, but it must be presented as interpretation, not fact. The fact is that the Bible contains symbolic time patterns. The testimony is that many believers feel the present age is spiritually urgent. The interpretation is that some connect these patterns to the possibility that the world is approaching a major prophetic turning point. But no one should claim to know the exact year. Jesus himself warned against careless certainty about dates and times. So instead of saying 2026 will definitely begin the final period, the safer and more honest line is this. For some prophecy watchers, the years around 2025 and 2026 feel especially significant because multiple global pressures appear to be converging at once. That is strong enough, because convergence is real. And if you stay with this pattern a little longer, the next part is where these separate pressures begin to connect in a way many people do not expect. Because the next part is where everything starts to connect in a way most people don't expect. War pressure, nuclear language, Middle East instability, food insecurity, moral collapse, natural disasters, Eastern military tension, global fear. Each one alone could be explained as history, but together they create a pattern that many people find difficult to dismiss. And this is where the story reaches its highest tension. Maybe 2025 was not the end of anything. Maybe it was a mirror showing the world what it has become. A world advanced enough to build artificial intelligence, but not wise enough to prevent war. A world rich enough to feed millions, but still watching people starve. A world connected by satellites and screens, but emotionally numb to suffering. A world that can predict storms but cannot stop the sea. A world that reads ancient warnings only after modern headlines make them feel real. That may be the real weight of this moment. Not that every event proves a final timeline, but that the world is beginning to look like the kind of world the Bible told us would exist when pressure increases. And for a viewer of faith, that should not create panic. It should create discernment, because prophecy was never given so people could obsess over dates. It was given so people would not be asleep when history began to tremble. So what comes next? No honest voice can say with certainty. Maybe 2026 brings escalation. Maybe it brings temporary peace. Maybe some conflicts cool while others ignite. Maybe the world keeps moving forward, pretending nothing has changed. But after 2025, one thing is difficult for many viewers to ignore. The questions are getting louder. What happens if Jerusalem remains the center of global pressure? What happens if war in Europe expands beyond its borders? What happens if famine spreads? What happens if moral numbness becomes normal? What happens if the seas keep roaring and nations keep trembling? What happens if the alliances forming today become the battle lines of tomorrow? Those are not claims. They are questions. And sometimes questions are more powerful than declarations. Because declarations can be wrong, but questions keep the viewer watching. They keep the mind open. They force people to examine the world with seriousness. And maybe that is the right way to end. Not with panic, not with a countdown, not with a claim no one can prove, but with a warning that is humble enough to be honest and strong enough to be remembered. If 2025 showed us anything, it is that the world can change faster than people expect. A ceasefire can collapse. A border can ignite. A city can flood. A sky can burn. A nation can starve. A rumor can shake governments. A single headline can make ancient scripture feel suddenly close. And whether someone sees these events as prophecy, pattern, or simply the pain of a broken world, the response should not be fear. It should be attention, because the most dangerous generation is not the one that sees trouble. It is the one that sees trouble and feels nothing. So stay awake, watch carefully, test every claim. Do not be manipulated by fear, but do not ignore the patterns of a world under pressure, because sometimes history does not feel obvious at first. Sometimes it whispers, then it repeats, then it shakes the ground beneath our feet. And by the time people finally recognize the pattern, the moment for reflection may already be slipping away. If this kind of careful, grounded biblical analysis helps you see the world more clearly, stay with the next episode, because what comes next may challenge everything you thought you understood. Because the next question is even bigger. If these events are only the beginning of the pressure, what does Scripture say comes after the world stops pretending everything is normal?